Oakland, California. December of 1964, the small martial arts school on Broadway Street sat in darkness. Except for the pale glow of fluorescent lights filtering through papered windows. Outside, a cold winter wind swept through Chinatown, carrying the smell of rain and the distant sounds of evening traffic. But inside those walls, the air was thick with something far heavier than weather. It was thick with anticipation, with anger, with the weight of centuries-old traditions about to collide with revolutionary ideas. 20. People stood pressed against the walls of the training area, their breaths visible in the poorly heated space. They had come as witnesses, not to a demonstration or a friendly sparring session, but to something far more significant, a challenge match, a private war that would determine the future of Chinese martial arts in America. On one side of the room stood Wong Jack Man's supporters, traditional martial artists from San Francisco's Chinatown who had traveled to Oakland for this moment. They wore expressions of righteous certainty, confident that their champion would restore honor to their community. Wong Jack Man himself stood among them, a picture of classical elegance in his traditional Chinese clothing. At 5 feet 10 inches and 165 pounds, he carried himself with the refined grace of a man who had spent his entire life perfecting the ancient arts. His specialty was Northern Shaolin, supplemented by Tai Chi, and his reputation in the Chinese community was impeccable. They called him the Pride of Chinatown. On the other side stood Bruce Lee's students and supporters, a notably diverse group that included faces of different races, different backgrounds. This diversity was precisely the problem. This was why Wong Jack Man had come. This was what would be settled tonight. Bruce Lee stood in the center of his own school, wearing simple black clothing, his feet bare against the wooden floor. At 24 years old, he had already begun to challenge everything the traditional martial arts community held sacred. He taught anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their race or ethnicity. He questioned classical techniques. He spoke openly about the limitations of traditional forms. And now, the elders of Chinatown had decided he must be stopped. A formal challenge letter had arrived days earlier, delivered by representatives of the Chinese martial arts community. The message was clear. Stop teaching foreigners or face the consequences. Bruce Lee's response had been equally clear. He would not stop. He would not bow to tradition for tradition's sake. And if they wanted to challenge him, he would answer, "If you want to discover what happened in the most legendary private fight in martial arts history, and why this night changed Bruce Lee and the entire martial arts world forever, stay until the end of this story. You will not regret it." Linda Lee, Bruce's wife, stood near the door, her face pale with worry. She was pregnant with their first child, and she had begged Bruce to refuse the challenge. But she also knew her husband. Once his principles were questioned, once his right to teach was threatened, there was no force on earth that could make him back down. The room fell silent as Wong Jack Man stepped forward, his movements carrying the flowing grace of classical kung fu. He stopped 10 feet from Bruce and performed a formal bow, the traditional gesture of respect between martial artists before combat, but his eyes held no warmth, only cold determination. "You have brought shame upon our community," Wong said, his English accented but clear. For generations, Chinese martial arts were sacred knowledge, passed only to those worthy of receiving them. You have opened our secrets to outsiders. You have disgraced our ancestors. Bruce did not return the formal bow. He simply stood, relaxed but alert, his dark eyes fixed on his opponent. "I teach anyone with a sincere desire to learn. Knowledge belongs to those who seek it, not to those who would hoard it behind walls of tradition. Then you leave us no choice." Wong's stance shifted subtly, his weight settling into the classical Shaolin position that had been refined over centuries. Defend your right to teach. Here, now, if you lose, you close your school and return to Hong Kong. If you win, we will not trouble you again. A murmur rippled through the witnesses. The stakes were now explicit. This was not merely a contest of skill. This was a battle for Bruce Lee's entire future in America. Bruce nodded slowly. "I accept. But understand this. I do not fight for your approval or your permission. I fight because you have threatened what I have built. When this is over, I will continue teaching exactly as I have been. The only question is whether you will continue trying to stop me." The witnesses pressed tighter against the walls, creating a makeshift arena in the center of the school. There would be no referee, no rounds, no time limits, no rules except the most fundamental one. The fight would continue until one man could not continue or admitted defeat. Wong Jack Man settled into his fighting stance, a beautiful expression of classical Northern Shaolin. His hands traced graceful patterns in the air, his footwork light and precise. Every movement spoke of decades of traditional training, of forms practiced 10,000 times until they became as natural as breathing. Bruce Lee's stance was different, lower, more direct. His hands held forward in a guard position that owed something to Wing Chun, something to Western boxing, something to principles he was still developing. There was no flourish in his posture, only efficiency, only readiness. For a long moment, the two men simply watched each other, Wang circling slowly, looking for an opening. Bruce tracking his movement with minimal motion, conserving energy, waiting. Wong attacked first. His technique was a sweeping combination drawn from classical Shaolin, circular movements designed to confuse and overwhelm. His hands traced arcs in the air, creating a flowing pattern of potential strikes that traditional opponents would struggle to read. It was beautiful. It was technically perfect. It was useless. Bruce did not attempt to match Wong's circular patterns with circular defenses. He moved forward in a straight line, intercepting Wong's technique before it could fully develop. His fist shot out in a direct punch that caught Wang on the shoulder. Disrupting his balance and destroying the flow of his combination, Wang stumbled back, his eyes widening. No one had ever simply walked through his techniques before. He reset, attempted another classical sequence, a graceful kick flowing into a spinning back fist. Again, he did not block in the traditional sense. He simply occupied the space where Wong's techniques needed to develop, smothering them before they could gain momentum. A sharp kick to Wong's lead leg destabilized him. A quick punch to the body made him gasp. The witnesses watched in stunned silence. Wong Jack Man was one of the finest traditional martial artists in the Chinese-American community. His technique was flawless by classical standards, but those classical standards seemed suddenly irrelevant against an opponent who refused to play by classical rules. Wong retreated, trying to create distance, trying to reset the engagement on his terms. Bruce did not allow it. He pressed forward relentlessly, cutting off angles. Denying Wong the space he needed for his sweeping techniques to function, the fight devolved into something far messier than either side had anticipated. Wong, desperate, abandoned his classical forms and began fighting for survival. He threw wild punches, attempted grappling, tried anything to stop Bruce's relentless advance. Bruce continued pressing, his strikes coming from angles Wong could not predict, his movement closing distance before Wong could establish his preferred range. They crashed into walls. They knocked over equipment. The witnesses scrambled to avoid being caught in the chaos. This was not the elegant display of martial arts that Wong's supporters had expected. This was a fight, raw, brutal, and increasingly one-sided. 1 minute passed, then 2. Bruce was clearly dominating, but Wong refused to surrender. Every time Bruce knocked him down, Wong struggled back to his feet. Every time Bruce landed a clean strike, Wong absorbed it and continued fighting. His traditional robes were torn. Blood trickled from his lip, but still he would not quit. By the 3rd minute, Bruce Lee was breathing hard. This realization would haunt him long after the fight ended. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to finish a fight against a single opponent. In a real combat situation, 3 minutes was an eternity. 3 minutes meant his techniques were not efficient enough. 3 minutes meant he had wasted energy on movements that did not end the confrontation. But in the moment, there was only the fight. Bruce finally secured a dominant position. Taking Wong to the ground and pinning him against the wooden floor, his forearm pressed against Wong's throat, not choking but controlling, demonstrating absolute dominance. "Do you give up?" Bruce demanded, his voice hard with exertion. Wong Jack Man lay beneath him, his beautiful traditional clothing ruined, his pride shattered, his body exhausted. For a long moment, he said nothing. Perhaps he was considering continuing, perhaps he was simply too drained to speak then. Finally, the words came. "I give up." Bruce released him immediately and rose to his feet. He extended a hand to help Wong stand, but Wong refused it, struggling upright on his own. The two men faced each other in the center of the destroyed training area. Surrounded by witnesses who would carry different versions of this night for the rest of their lives, Wong Jack Man supporters claimed afterward that the fight had been much closer than Bruce's side reported. Some said Wang had been winning before, an accidental eye poke changed the momentum. Others claimed the fight was stopped prematurely, that Wang could have continued. These alternative accounts would circulate through the martial arts community for decades. But the witnesses who stood in that room knew what they had seen. They had seen Wong Jack Man, the Pride of Chinatown, forced to utter the words that every martial artist dreads, "I give up." The political consequences were immediate. The traditional Chinese martial arts community never again formally challenged Bruce Lee's right to teach. The implicit threat that had hung over his school evaporated. He had won his freedom to teach anyone he chose, regardless of race or background. But for Bruce Lee, the victory felt hollow. In the days following the fight, he replayed every moment in his mind. 3 minutes. Why had it taken 3 minutes? His Wing Chun training had served him well. But he had found himself abandoning it during the chaotic middle portion of the fight, improvising, adapting on instinct rather than executing with precision. The classical techniques he had learned, the forms he had practiced for years, had proven insufficient for the reality of unstructured combat. When Wong abandoned his traditional patterns and began fighting wildly, Bruce had been forced to adapt in ways his training had not prepared him for. This was the lesson of the Wong Jack Man fight. Not that Bruce Lee was the superior martial artist. That had been demonstrated clearly enough. The lesson was that being superior was not enough. The lesson was that traditional martial arts, even in the hands of someone as gifted as Bruce Lee, had fundamental limitations that needed to be addressed. In the weeks and months that followed, Bruce Lee began the process that would transform him from a skilled martial artist into a revolutionary one. He started questioning everything he had learned. He began studying Western boxing more seriously, analyzing its footwork and punching mechanics. He explored fencing for its concepts of timing and interception. He examined wrestling and judo for their grappling principles. From this crucible of self-examination, Jeet Kune Do was born. The way of the intercepting fist. A martial art that was not really a martial art. A philosophy of combat that rejected all fixed patterns in favor of adaptability, directness, and efficiency. A system built on the principle that the best techniques were those that ended confrontations in seconds, not minutes. Bruce Lee would later reflect on the Wong Jack Man fight as one of the pivotal moments of his life. "I won," he would tell students, "but I was not satisfied with my performance. The fight lasted too long. I was too tired afterward. If I had faced multiple opponents, or if Wang had been armed, the outcome might have been very different." This ability to find failure within victory was perhaps Bruce Lee's greatest strength. Where other martial artists might have celebrated their triumph and moved on unchanged, Bruce saw an opportunity for growth. He saw the limitations of his training exposed and chose to transcend them rather than ignore them. Wong Jack Man returned to San Francisco and never publicly discussed the fight again. He continued teaching traditional martial arts for decades, maintaining a dignified silence about the most famous 3 minutes of his life. When journalists or martial arts historians approached him for interviews about the Bruce Lee fight, he consistently declined to comment. Perhaps he was ashamed of his defeat. Perhaps he simply wanted to move past a moment that defined him in ways he had never intended. Or perhaps, like Bruce Lee, he had learned something from that night that he preferred to keep private. The witnesses scattered 2 different lives, carrying their memories of that December evening with them. Some became martial artists themselves, inspired by what they had seen. Others simply told the story at dinner parties, each retelling, adding, or subtracting details until the truth became impossible to separate from legend. But the impact of that night extended far beyond the people who stood in that small Oakland school. The Wong Jack Man fight became a foundational story in martial arts history, cited in countless books, analyzed in documentaries, dramatized in films. It became proof that Bruce Lee was not merely a movie star who knew some kung fu, but a genuine fighter who had faced real challenges and emerged victorious. More importantly, it became the origin story of Jeet Kune Do, the philosophy that would influence martial arts for generations to come. Every mixed martial artist who trains in multiple disciplines, every fighter who rejects rigid adherence to single styles, Every practitioner who values effectiveness over tradition owes something to the lessons. Bruce Lee learned on that cold December night. Victory means nothing if you do not learn from it. Bruce Lee won the Wong Jack Man fight, but he refused to let that victory make him complacent. He used it as a mirror, examining his own limitations with unflinching honesty. And from that examination, he built something new, something revolutionary, something that changed the world. If this story inspired you to look honestly at your own limitations and find opportunities for growth, even in your victories, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear that true champions are made, not by winning, but by learning. Leave a comment telling us about a time when a victory taught you more about your weaknesses than your strengths. We will see you in the next video with more incredible stories from the world of martial arts.